This video is for day 15. It's a day late. I recorded something originally and I watched it back and it was so unhappy with it that I didn't publish it. It felt like if you watched it, it would have been a waste of your time as well. I think part of the issue is that I feel like I need to code something every day. So I sit down and I code. And this isn't my full-time job. I don't have a lot of time to think about this outside of actually doing it. And I put something together and tried to come up with a solution that was not really well thought out. And it's bad, and that's not what I want you to see, because it's not something you should learn. How to not think through solutions seems bad, and then also it's a waste of your time. Like if you spent an hour and 30 minutes following along in the video, and that's if you can keep up. Like let's be real, I've done tutorials like this before, and I pause a lot. So an hour and 30-minute video, that's a long video. That could be 3 hours, maybe more, of stop and play. Playback, I guess. And it just felt like not something that I wanted you to have to go through, especially since we achieved so little ultimately. We did a lot of debugging, troubleshooting, and if there were nuggets of wisdom in there, I would have published them. But to be honest, it felt like a bad technical interview, and it's just a waste of your all's time to watch that. So I technically, when I first started, I said I wasn't going to code anything off screen. Technically, that's true. I should have done a git commit beforehand, learned my lesson. We'll be doing that at the end of every video now, because I can't go back to where we were. I can't easily go back to where we were without like undoing all the steps that were done yesterday. So I think what I'm going to do today with today's video, it'll probably be a bit of a shorter one, and it will be going back over the changes that we ultimately ended on at the end of that video. There were a lot of changes to get us there, and we're going to clean them up because they're still not great. So let's talk through what your page view needs to look like. Oh, that's wild. Why is it's not showing display capture? Why is that not showing? Weird. That's so interesting. Will other things show? Firefox, will you show? No. Display capture. Is it pointed to the wrong display? Oh, we don't want my 1Password. Hang on. Display capture. Okay, that was weird. It's just issue after issue right now. Okay, so I'll walk through the changes that need to be made to get to where we're at now. So we created a quote page view. This quote page view is a stateless widget, like so. There's a state, and it looks like this. Most of the state comes from what we had originally in the quote view. So this quote page view, let's go look at the build method first. So it's a scaffold, which this stuff came from the quote view. We ripped it out of the quote view and put it in here. There's our floating action button. And the main difference here is in our stream builder, instead of rendering the quote and the button and things like that, we render a pageview.builder. You'll notice this is a new method, this is a new type as well. We'll talk about this in just a second. But yes, I'll scroll slowly through all of this class. Pause the video if you need, type in anything. But we have a quote view model. We have a page controller. There is an init state method right here. This loads all quotes on the view model. In your version of the code, this will not exist. We'll talk through this in just a second. Setup notification scheduling. This is the setup notification scheduling method from the quote view model. The quote view. We pull it out to this new quote page view. And just to talk a little bit about this, the quote page view will wrap the quote view. So it's a page view will like allow, you know what, it might be easier to see. So you can swipe to go between quotes. Setup notification scheduling, just copy that from, or cut that from the quote view and paste it here. And then our build method is the meat and potatoes here. We return a scaffold with an app bar. I'm going to minimize the app bar because this does not change from the one in the quote view. The body is what's important. So the body is a stream builder, just like before. We point to the quote view model state, just like before. We have a builder, just like before. We handle the error case, just like before. And then we have a success case, almost just like before. The main difference is that this is quote view model all loaded. This is a bad name. We're going to change this in a minute. We return a page view builder. We reference our page view controller here. We set it to reverse because we want our last item to be the 0th item here. We have our item count of 94. This is how many items we have in our page view builder. Your number may be different. If you have more quotes or fewer quotes, you may want to change this. We also probably should not just hard code this, and we should get this from a value. So we will do that as well. I'm going to make a note to get this programmatically. And then we have an item builder. So this item builder is a function just like the stream builder. This one gets an index. So this is the page that we're looking at. And then it requires you, that was a weird sound. It requires you to return a quote view, or it requires you to return a widget. In our case, it's a quote view. And we get all of our quotes in this quote view model all loaded class. And then we subtract 93 minus the index. So if the index is 0, aka the rightmost quote, we will get the last quote, which is 93. We can also flip this and I guess not reverse this in this case, and then just use the index here as well, but we'll keep it how we have it for now. Then we return a quote view. You'll notice that our quote view in your branch of the code does not take in a quote or quote entries. It takes in a date. We will change our quote view in just a moment to handle this. Lastly, in our builder, our stream builder, we return a circular progress indicator just like in the quote view. Okay, we will have to make some changes to our floating action button as well. So our floating action button here has the same on pressed, shows a modal just like before, shows a feedback form just like before. The main difference here is that we have on line 110, we have final now equals datetime.now. And then we call await quote model submit entry text, and then we take now, we subtract a duration, which is the controller.page.floor. So controller page is the page that we're currently on in our page view. It is a double, and we need it to be an integer, so we always round down. It is possibly null. There's a case where it could be null. Realistically for us, it's not, but it would be better to handle, well, I don't know if it would be better to handle an incorrect state than it would be to throw an exception. So let's change that too. We'll have it throw an exception if it can't find one. And then just like before, we have our nav pop and our scaffold messenger.show snack bar, just like before. Okay, let's go to our quote view. You should have, if you're at this point, you should have like red underlines here in your quote view. Let's go ahead and solve that. So I'm going to remove all these extra imports since we don't need them now. Our quote view is now a stateless widget. If you need help changing from a stateful widget to a stateless widget, the best thing to do would be to come here, type STL, and then hit stateless, and then type in quote view. Take the old build method, take it here, copy it, paste it right here. Like basically just like that. These need to be, we need these items. I'm going to undo that change since it's duplicate code for me in this case, and then we need to add this dot quote and this dot quote entries. And then we need to add a property called final quote and then a property called final quote entries. And let's type list entry with date time. And you'll see how this fits together soon. Additionally, we had a datetime formatter in the stateful widget. The datetime formatter needs to become a property on the quote view. And then our build method looks like so. It does not change much. The main thing is instead of referencing the view model here. If you notice, we have removed the view model from this entirely. So just to talk about that, the quote view doesn't need a view model because it's just displaying data now. It's not manipulating data or state itself. It's stateless. So in our case, we've removed the quote view model. We return center, column, and most of this is exactly what you have before. I would just double check and make sure that that is the case. So we have padding, we have the text, the size box, another size box here, elevated button. Yeah, none of this should have changed. The main difference here is this method, the show dialog, will have changed. And the way that we get the quote changes. So quote text and quote author is still fine, but it's passed into the quote view. Now this thing, how the show dialog has changed, the main thing here is that our quote entries are passed in as well. So this line should look like this: for entry with date, time, entry, and quote entries. And that should be the only other change. We have one more class we need to talk about, which is our view model. I'm going to click on quote view model all loaded to take us into our view model. We have added another class to model this new state. This is if we load all the quotes into memory at once, which is what we need to do for the page view, right? They all need to be in memory so we can cycle through them. Go ahead and type this out, and then we will rename this in just a minute. Mainly because the purpose of our view model has changed. We don't need quote view model loaded anymore. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and remove quote view model loaded. And then we'll come down here and we'll remove load quotes. I'm going to command click this first just to make sure there's nothing referencing it. There's not. So this is dead code now. Our view model was referencing this, or I'm sorry, our quote view was referencing this originally, but our quote view doesn't have a view model anymore. It doesn't reference a view model. There's nothing for it there. So instead, we have a new method called load all quotes, which is called by our quote page view, our new class that we just wrote. It's very similar. It calls state.add quote view model loading. It gets all of the quotes from the quote loader. It maps the quotes. And this is actually a little bit of complicated code, so we'll talk about this in just a second. And then it does another bit with that mapped code, and then it emits a new state, this new quote view model all loaded state. Okay. So let's talk about this. So we get all the quotes. We get a list. It's a list of quotes. If we hover over the type, you can see list of quotes. We need to turn this list into a tuple of quote and list entry with date time. A tuple is just a way to group two different types together, if you're unfamiliar with them. So what we're doing is we're mapping these quotes. So we're going to use the map method. The map method iterates over each item in the list. Maps over each item in the list and then does something to it, applies some transformation to that data. In our case, we're using an async function here because we're going to use the await syntax right here. And what we're doing is E is the quote. So we're going to return a tuple that looks like this. You know what? This actually, let's rewrite this so it's a little easier to follow. So if we do this and we take this, we can return this, and then we can pull this out and make this easier, right? So this will be entries, and that'll be await get quote entry for that quote, and we pass in E. And now we make this a little simpler. This can become entries. And then we get entries with date time. And we'll call this quote entry. We'll name our variable to model the type that this is returning. Also because entries with date time doesn't really make a ton of sense. It could be null. This is some logic that we have previously. So this quote entry could be null. So if it is null, we need to coerce it to an empty list. Simply enough. We can do that here, like so. Or we could do it with an if statement. We have a lot of options. I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, now that we have mapped all those quotes, if we look at the type that we get, it's pretty wild. So it's an iterable of future of a tuple with quote as the first type and a list of entry with date time as the second type. So what we want to do is we want to remove this future. And the way that we remove this future is to realize those values, and we do that with the await method. So the await method doesn't take a list of futures, it only takes a future. So there is a method called future.wait that takes in a list of futures. So you can see here, iterable, future, t, futures. There's some other things you can do, but we don't need them. And then we have to await that. So basically this future, this list of futures get converted to a single future that is resolved when all of them resolve, and then we await that. Now that we've done that, we have our mapped quotes, and then we can omit our state. Select quote for date, we still use for submit entry, I guess. Yes, okay. And then submit entry still works as you would expect. We call that in our quote page view. So let's do quote view model. Let's get back to this file. We have get entry for quote, get settings. Oh, one more change. This is load quote. In your branch of code, this should be load quote. Change this to load all quotes. Our load quote method has been deleted. Okay, now that we're kind of all on the same page, let's clean some stuff up. You should at this point be able to run your code and be able to swipe between these. You can't go past the new date, but you should be able, or the 94th item, I guess. But you should be able to swipe through these. You'll notice some interesting things. We're on Herodotus. We probably had more Marcus Aurelius quotes. So we have lost the randomness, or not the randomness, but the hashing of our quote values. So we're going to have to add that back. Before we do that, though, this quote view model all loaded, we're going to rename this. This will now be quote view model loaded. All is redundant because this quote view model is returning all the data. It was returning single quotes originally, now it's returning all, so it's just redundant. So I use the refactor tool to rename this. That will rename it in every file, so I shouldn't have other things that I need to update. But I am going to turn on the problems list down here. Okay, yeah. So if it failed to rename something, we would see it in the problems list, but it succeeded. Okay, so we have our quote view model loaded. I will go ahead and hard reload this because we just changed the constant class. Okay, so we're good there. We need to get our values back in our hash method, or our hash setup. So when we load all of our quotes here and load all quotes, we are mapping the quote entry for that quote, but I think we need to organize them by the date. So we have quote loader.load, which is, oh, sorry, it's not in this class. So we have our quote loader.load, and this loads all the quotes and returns them, calls quote parser.parse, and then returns them in a CSV. Or, sorry, parses the CSV, returns them in a list of quotes. So we had our quote loader. We also had a hasher, right? Am I crazy? Quote parser, quote loader, quote selector, that's what it is. So we have our quote selector, and it selects by date. It takes in our quotes. So what we need to do is we basically need to call this presumably 94 times, or for each item in the quotes list, and make sure that we're selecting it in the right order. So what we'll do, probably the simplest solution here, would be to take our quotes, create a quote selector. It takes our quotes in, so we pass those in like so. And then we want to do something like final selected equals quotes dot map e, and then we want to call quote selector dot select, and then we need to pass in a date time. So what we need is, in our case, we need our index, and I don't believe we have access to that when we map. So let me see if we have another option. Element at index, iterable. This actually might work. Okay, so iterable.generate. Yeah, actually, okay. So we can do list.generate. The length will be quotes.length. And then the index here will be date time. Or sorry, not the index, but the value that we're returning is datetime.now. Subtract duration days, and we want to subtract 94 minus index. Sorry, I think 93 minus index. I'll add a couple commas here to sort this out. And then we change selected here, like so. Selected is generating just a list of date times, which is not what we want. So instead we want to wrap this in a call to quote selector.select, and then we paste the date time there. Let's give this a shot. In theory, this should get us back to our Marcus Aurelius quotes. I cannot escape death, but at least I can escape the fear of it. Life is neither good nor evil, but only a place for good and evil. Conceal a flaw. Yeah, this is good. This looks like where we last left off. And you can see that we're selecting the quote entries like so. So we're in a pretty good spot. Okay, let's see what else we have. We said a to-do was added. I'm going to clean this import up. And if you don't use the problem view in VS Code, definitely consider it. It's really helpful in kind of navigating around to things that need attention at some point. So we had this get this programmatically. So what we can do is we know this value, right? This is snapshot.data. Oops, no, I'm sorry, not snapshot.data. And also we're back in our quote page view. This is the to-do that I added to get this value programmatically, the 94 items, because hard coding that is not good. But we can do data.quotes.length. And that's data right here on line 79. And then we can remove this to-do. If you want to go a step farther, this value right here, 93, that's also an arbitrary hard-coded value. So this would be data.quotes.length minus 1. And then we still want to subtract the index from that. Okay. This comment we don't need anymore because it is implemented, so we can remove that. And again, this is in the quote page view, and I think we're in a pretty good spot. Okay. Curious how long this one's been going. 23 minutes. Okay, so I thank you. I know this is not the way that we normally do these. I am really sorry that this was a here's a bunch of code, kind of follow along as I talk through it type style. I'm going to commit right after this, so if we run into more issues, I can easily get back to this spot, but I hadn't committed in a while. So thanks for sticking with me on this. Hopefully you're happy with how this is turning out. Play around with it and make sure that the app is working as you would expect. I will do the same, and we will pick up soon.